All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our third class in this series on uniting wisdom and compassion. So I'll catch everyone up if you're just arriving today, haven't taken the other classes, other sessions. Do that shortly, but let's go ahead and start today with just the refuge and bodhicitta prayer. Shayla will get that on the screen and we can recite that together. And as usual, we'll recite the first time in English just to remind ourselves of what these words are in this prayer. Finding safe direction and refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. In particular, the Dharma, the teachings that we need to follow. And then the last two lines where we generate the motivation of bodhicitta, the wish to be of benefit to all beings to the greatest degree, helping them to achieve their potential by accomplishing that ourselves first, becoming a Buddha for their sake. So we'll recite that in English and then twice chanting the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyan gipe soknam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shok Sangye chodang soki choknam la Jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyan gipe soknam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shok. Thank you, Sheila, for sharing the prayers. Let's go ahead and do a short meditation. So as usual, spend a few minutes just focusing the mind to let go of whatever distractions we might have. And then after that, I'll lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation for today. So again, for the first part of it, if you have a technique you already use with the breath, feel free to use that. Just bringing your awareness to the breath in a very gentle and yet focused way. And whenever the mind wanders from the breath, just guiding it back to the breath. And then after a few minutes of this silent meditation on the breath, I'll lead you in, again, a reflection to strengthen our motivation of bodhicitta before we begin. So let's go ahead and start with our meditation now. So now with our minds a bit more settled, focused, let's review in brief the teachings we looked at last week that inform our motivation, inform our practice of compassion. So last week in particular, we examined how all the results that the Buddha taught, everything that we can attain, that sentient beings can attain, comes from the root of compassion. We saw how first those beings who seek their own liberation, who want to attain the state of nirvana, their own peace, need to rely upon the teachings of a Buddha. So we then ask the question, well, where do Buddhas come from? If these people who attain individual liberation rely upon them, well, then we have to see, what are the causes of a Buddha? We see that the most direct cause are the bodhisattvas that eventually become Buddhas. A bodhisattva, a being who is intent upon attaining enlightenment, Buddhahood, to benefit all beings, also has their respective causes. Where do bodhisattvas come from? We saw that there were three main causes: compassion, this non-dual understanding, having examined the wisdom teachings of the Buddha, and then, of course, the mind of bodhicitta, the mind that aspires to benefit all beings and lead them to enlightenment by becoming a Buddha themselves. And of those three causes, we're going to examine a bit more today. Compassion is the first, the root. We have to start by opening our eyes to see the situation that all beings are in. Begins with ourselves, acknowledging our own situation. And then we can become aware of the fact that all beings are in the same predicament. There's no difference fundamentally between ourselves and others. We're all dealing with the same basic situation, being under the control of our karma, our delusions, going from life to life and never knowing a real moment of peace, continuing to experience the varieties of suffering and what the Buddha called dukkha, dissatisfaction. And on the basis of some awareness of the suffering of all beings and a desire to address that, to help ourselves and others attain the peace that we can, we then investigate the teachings of the Buddha to understand that there is a way out. If we cultivate the wisdom that sees the true nature of things, we then can be free of what is causing us to be in this situation. Our own ignorance, our own lack of awareness about how things are. And then, of course, we can share that knowledge with others, because that is the problem for them as well. All beings, in the end, under the control of this ignorance that is not aware of the nature of things. And on the basis of that, we cultivate the mind of bodhicitta, recognizing that it is possible for ourselves and all beings to attain enlightenment. So we generate the compassionate wish to help them on that path, and the understanding that through developing wisdom ourselves, we are in the best position to help them to do the same. And we aspire to develop our minds completely to the state of Buddhahood, a state where we will then be able to work perfectly and effortlessly for the welfare of all beings. And we will become a bodhisattva, eventually become a Buddha, and then eventually be able to help all beings to attain the goals of individual liberation as well as complete enlightenment. It's for this purpose that we're here today, to examine the teachings of the Buddha that support our development of compassion and wisdom to the degree that we then can help all beings to do the same. And you can open your eyes fully when you're ready, and we'll start today's class. So, want to initially go over just the read together. We did our prayers already, but we're going to read together the verses that we're working with. Again, these are available through the materials link on the website for the Buddhist Center. So you can go to the page for this course and have access to these if you wish. It's kind of hard to read the italics. I should have not made them in italics, but if you, let me actually, I think I did make it a little bit larger last week because I can do that with a bit bigger margin. There we go. Okay, so let's just read this first verse. It's divided into three parts, but this is what we went through last week, and then that way I can talk a little bit about that. And there was actually one question from Lorna that I wanted to address from last week. Hearers and middling realizers of suchness are born from the kings of subduers. Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas. The mind of compassion, non-dual understanding, and the altruistic mind of enlightenment are the causes of children of conquerors. So again, I just ran you through a brief review of that in the meditation. Essentially, we start with these folks that are mentioned in the very first line. These are the two categories of practitioners in Buddhism who want to attain their own liberation. You know, that's the burden that they can bear. They don't think beyond their own welfare, which is, again, not to be in any way put down. It's just their capacity. And those beings who do that are arising from, are born from the Buddhas, the kings of subduers. They depend upon Buddhas teaching them the Dharma so that they know what to meditate on in order to attain that state. So the one thing I did want to mention while we're on that line, again, the question was about this word suchness, because the word suchness was used in particular in a verse from the 21 praises to the praises to the 21 taras. Most of you know this practice. And there's one particular verse, it's actually the last verse, verse 21, where if you look at the literal translation of it, the Sanskrit word is this word tattva. Tattva is usually translated as suchness or thusness. And the idea behind it is that it generally is referring to the emptiness, the lack of inherent existence. We're going to talk about this more a little bit today and next Sunday in particular. This is the truth that we need to realize, this suchness or thusness or emptiness or selflessness, lots of different terms for it. It is the way in the end that we have to understand how things exist by understanding how they don't exist, that they don't have any inherent nature, that they lack that. This tattva, this suchness, is actualized in its fullest state, of course, when we attain Buddhahood. This flower is kind of in the way here. Maybe I'll set it over here. When we realize Buddhahood, of course, then we are in this state where we are realizing that emptiness all the time. A Buddha's mind is never parted from that. And also, the Buddha is imbued with through compassionate activity and so on, the ability to benefit all beings. So when we talk about the final state of a Buddha, there's often this word tathagata. Tathagata or tathagata, depends upon who's pronouncing it. But the idea is this is a state of having attained that thusness or that suchness, where all of your being is fully imbued with that wisdom. So going back to this verse that Lorna brought up in terms of this praise to this, the 21st Tara, they say that she has the three suchnesses or natures. Now, the commentaries refer to this as essentially relating to the three doors, as we often call them, the three ways in which all of us are involved in the world. Initially through our thoughts, our minds, and then our speech, and of course our physical actions. So the three suchnesses that are being referred to in that verse in particular are the body, speech, and mind of an enlightened being, of Tara. Tara is this female Buddha who is, again, fully enlightened and is able to help all beings through her swift energy and so on. Pretty amazing being. And most of you do some practice around green Tara in particular, but the recitation of the praises kind of brings that enlightened energy into our lives. So in that particular verse, and I'll actually even share you a little bit from Thupten Chodron's commentary on this practice. The pink section here, at the top of the page is where she has her translation of it as three natures. Homage to you, adorned with three natures. Her three natures, she says, are her body, speech, and mind, appearing as Om Ah Hung. These are the three syllables that bless those places in particular. Om is her crown chakra, Ah is her throat chakra, and Hung at her heart chakra. These pacify internal poisons, such as the afflictions, and external poisons or interferences. So the idea here is that we have when we're doing that praise to Tara and recalling her three natures or three suchnesses, we're recalling the fact that when you attain this fully enlightened state, your body, speech, and mind, because you don't ever lose your body, speech, and mind. These are the ways that you manifest and help other beings, right? Through the thoughts that you have, the ability to, be focused on their minds, their uh, kind of what will help them, their dispositions, and so on. The speech that you give to them that will impart the Dharma, the actions you do for them that will help them on their path. We're just recalling that in that way, that being is imbued with that perfect wisdom in all three doors, through their body, through their speech, through their mind. That's the essence of it. But know that this word suchness or tattva is used in a variety of ways to refer to different aspects and what have you. We're referring to here, when we go back to the verse, we're talking about in that first line, middling realizers of suchness. We talked about these folks. These are what are called solitary realizers. They realize emptiness or suchness in a middling way. They're the hearers are the least of them in terms of the amount of time they put into practicing their path, but they eventually attain their own individual liberation. The solitary realizers also attain theirs. But all of these beings, and even of course the bodhisattvas, realize suchness. They realize emptiness. That's how they attain their goal. Well, of course, again, that going back to the commentary on this first part, where do they come from, these beings who attain liberation? Where does their fruit of liberation come from? Sure, their own practice, but they have to have the teachings of a Buddha to know what to practice, to know what to realize. The next line, verse 11c, the third line in this verse, Buddhas, of course, are born from bodhisattvas. We've talked about how a bodhisattva eventually becomes a Buddha. But moreover, also some bodhisattvas that are novice, that are new on the path, they also have other bodhisattvas that help them to retain their bodhicitta, to make sure that they continue to engage in the bodhisattva's deeds. So there are a variety of ways that bodhisattvas help, to become Buddhas, to eventually move into that state. The last part of this, the D, E, and F, the last three lines, refer to those three causes of bodhisattvas. So again, this is like a chain of causes from the initial ones, which are the mind of compassion, non-dual understanding, and bodhicitta, the altruistic mind of enlightenment, arise the children of the conquerors, which is another term for bodhisattvas. Bodhisattvas eventually become Buddhas. Buddhas teach the Dharma to other beings so they can attain their state of liberation. All of it arises from compassion. And we're going to look at this in more detail in today's class of why is compassion singled out as the main cause. But we already examined it a little bit in that, as I said in the motivation today, initially we have to become kind of aware of the suffering that beings are going through. Remember in the first class of this series, we talked about these three levels of suffering or dukkha. The Buddha used this word dukkha, which is more evocative. It has the idea that we're all in a state of dissatisfaction. Whether we call ourselves, a suffering being or not, that might depend upon our own perception of what is suffering. Right now, many of you might say, well, no, I'm not suffering. I'm not having any major mental or physical problems. But again, that's only the tip of the iceberg. That's the first type of dukkha. It's the evident form of dukkha that often is the place where our hearts are moved, right? Because we see being suffering in that way. We see what's going on in Gaza, or we see, people being blown up on their boats in the Caribbean, or whatever the case might be. We see people being arrested on our streets. We see all of this happening, and our heart breaks because we see others suffering. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? Below that are the other two levels of dukkha. The fact that even when beings find something that they consider to be happiness or pleasure, it's not capable of being sustained. And if you sustain it, it actually becomes painful. Let's think of anything that you've enjoyed in your past. If you were still enjoying it at this moment for the years or months or whatever since you first started enjoying it, you wouldn't be enjoying it. It would become annoying. It would become awful. Right? We can't partake of these things as sources of true happiness. They give us happiness for the moment, but it's only in contrast to some form of suffering. We're hungry, dealing with the hunger pains and what have you, and we go to eat a meal, you can't sit there and keep eating a meal for hours and hours and hours and days and days and days. It'll be producing pain, very short period of time, right? That's the nature of those experiences. And then, of course, the third level of dukkha, that beings are caught up in an unsatisfactory situation to begin with. This is what we call pervasive conditioned dukkha, that just by being under the control of factors that keep you going from life to life, it's unsatisfactory. It's what we would call suffering. Again, it's not grosser forms of suffering, but it is a state of being in that, you know, undesirable situation. Again, this is the place we have to get to really make our bodhicitta and all these other factors complete, is to see that whoever we look at is suffering in that way. This is where your compassion really becomes very rich, because there's no one you can exclude from that who is in samsara, who is dealing with this situation of being under the control of these factors, going from life to life. Every being is an object of your compassion then. And once more, we're not just talking about the compassion that's simply moved by others' suffering and saying, oh, I wish they didn't have to suffer. This is the great compassion that thinks, I will do something about that. So this is what we're driving at in this these verses of praise in this text. Again, this is the initial verses of Master Chandrakirti's text, the supplement to the Middle Way, Madhyamaka. Let's go to the chart here that actually, this was the one that we used last week. Again, this is that little chain of causes that we have there that we just went through. Again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about non-dual awareness and the altruistic mind of enlightenment later, but know that, again, the mind of great compassion is at the root of creating a bodhisattva. So let's go down to the section in particular that we are going to look at next, which are the three main causes of a bodhisattva. Oops, I'm sorry, I did go through that. The importance of compassion in the 3 times. This is why we're singling out compassion as the root cause. To do this first, so let's go ahead and read the next verse. Sorry, should have done that before. This next verse is verse 2. It's kind of in the center of the screen there. Mercy alone is seen as the seed of a conqueror's rich harvest, as water for development, and as ripening in a state of long enjoyment. Therefore, at the start, I praise compassion. So again, we have 3 times being singled out here. And by the way, I mentioned in the first class, this word mercy is equivalent to compassion. There are 2 different terms in the Tibetan, ningje and sewa. And ningje is usually translated as compassion and sewa as mercy, but it's interchangeable. Mercy in our culture means something perhaps a little different than compassion, but it's an aspect of it. But the idea is that compassion alone is seen as is important in 3 times. First, as the seed, the beginning point to develop the rich harvest of a Buddha. Secondly, as water during the middle of the path to develop and grow the seed, right? And then as eventually, once it has fully ripened into a fruitful tree, to have the ripening into a state of great enjoyment, long enjoyment. Because when you become a Buddha, then you are a Buddha perpetually, for all time, helping all sentient beings. So let's take a look at my chart here. Whoops, I did the same thing, clicked on the wrong one. Let's go take a look at this chart. So we have, again, a particular time that we're referring to, beginning, middle, and end. And then we have a simile that we are going to use to talk about how it is important at those 3 times. Again, there's not a whole lot more I'm going to add from this, and we may even skip over going back to Lama Tsongkhapa's text on this, but in the initial point of our practice, entering into the path, compassion is like a seed. This great compassion is important at the beginning, as it says there, since, just like planting the seed of a fruit tree, one must plant the seed of compassion in order to eventually reap a bountiful harvest. It's from the initial cause, the seed of compassion, that the shoot of bodhicitta arises. So again, bodhicitta and great compassion are distinct. We often, in some teachings, I see them being kind of equated. Great compassion is the seed from which your bodhicitta will arise. It has to be there to nurture that mind right from the beginning. And as I said, we have to have a compassion that goes beyond just compassion to that first level of dukkha or suffering. wanting beings not to have grosser forms of suffering. We want to go to the second level of dukkha. We want to even go to the third level of dukkha and generate this mind that sees that it's unsatisfactory that even one being is in that state where they are under the control of those factors and continuing to experience suffering. Great compassion is a mind we have to develop over time. And I'm not going to go into a lot of the techniques for doing that. I will touch on that a little bit. And in your meditation that you have for these last two classes, I'll go to that before we end today as well. We're going to talk about how we enhance our compassion through deeper understanding of the Buddha's teachings. And that's kind of where we're headed next after we look at compassion at these 3 times. But everything begins from your compassion. The Buddha would never have taught the Dharma if he had not been imbued with this compassion, seeing the suffering of all beings. I often use the phrase that essentially sentient beings are needlessly suffering. And they're suffering only because they haven't addressed the causes of that suffering. And if you have the awareness to help others to see that and to practice that, well, then you have the ability to free them from that suffering. This is what we are aspiring to with great compassion, is to say, I will do whatever it takes then to free all beings from suffering, to develop myself so I then can lead them on that path. I can guide them. We do have to attain our own liberation and enlightenment ourselves, without a doubt. But it's a lot of causes and conditions feed into that, right? If we don't have Buddhas appearing in our world, helping us on our path, giving us the teachings perfectly, well, then we lack that ability to connect with those teachings and practice them ourselves. But a Buddha can't enlighten you from their own side, right? There's that wonderful quote from one of the sutras of the Buddha where they say, a Buddha can't remove suffering like you would remove a thorn from someone's hand. And it would be nice, right, if the Buddhas could do that. Oh, there goes your suffering, Don. Oh, thank you. I'm free, right? They also don't take their, kind of wash away all of the negativities the way you would wash, stains out of a cloth, right? They can't do that. That's not a power that the Buddhas have. They also can't take their realizations and plant them in the mind of sentient beings. So then you kind of go, well, how do Buddhas help then? What's the point of Buddhas if they can't do all these things for us? The Buddhas teach the Dharma. This is how they help beings. That's the conclusion to that verse. And that's really the only way they can help us. They can impart other things through their magnificence and their development. But the main way that they help us on our path is through the Dharma. So all the teachings a Buddha gives are there because of compassion, because Buddhas are moved by the suffering of beings and want to impart the teachings that will help them. That's what it all boils down to in essence. And of course, it's our job as people who are aspiring to practice the Buddhist path, to engage in these the Bodhisattva teachings, to follow in their footsteps, to embark on our own understanding of these teachings. We have to develop that within our own minds. We have to develop realizations. But it all starts with the great compassion that a Buddha or a Bodhisattva wannabe, some aspirant, develops that mind. They go on to see if there's a way out through understanding that there is the wisdom of emptiness that can be developed. They generate bodhicitta. They become a bodhisattva. They practice the bodhisattva's deeds, and they eventually become a Buddha. It's laid out very clearly, and there are all sorts of wonderful teachings in this tradition that can guide us in knowing how to progress on that path. But bodhisattvas come from the main root of compassion. And then, of course, that gives rise to Buddhas, and that gives rise to all the other things that we looked at last week. Let's go on to the middle. In the middle of our path, when we are continuing to move and progress on the bodhisattva path, it's like water. As it says there on the right, compassion is important in the middle, since just as one must continually moisten the fruit plant with water, so too must that shoot of bodhicitta be moistened with compassion. If it is not moistened again and again with the water of compassion, the accumulation of the two collections of merit and wisdom, we talked about these previously, these are like the two wings of a bird. They entail essentially our compassionate method, that side of the path, as well as the wisdom wing of the path, what we are focusing on in this course of kind of uniting those two energies. We won't get the accumulation of those two energies. That won't occur. And there may even be degeneration of bodhicitta, particularly at the beginning. As we saw, bodhisattvas, when they enter the path, their bodhicitta is not so stable. It's strong, but it's not so stable. And they could be convinced to move away from that path. We need factors to kind of increase our bodhicitta. And great compassion is what moistens our bodhicitta. And it's what keeps us moving forward on our path. Recalling the suffering of beings, exposing ourselves to that reality, thinking about it frequently. This is how we strengthen our bodhicitta through working on our great compassion. So these two factors, again, feed into each other. They're not identical minds, but without great compassion, you cannot have bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is dependent upon that mind that aspires to protect beings from suffering and recognizes that, there has to be kind of that energy, that force to help beings because of the situation that they are in, because we understand that they do not know what is happening to them. They do not know what is going on. We're not feeling superior, like, prideful because we understand and they don't. The point is, it gives us even greater compassion. There's a wonderful quote that I like to share, I wanted to share at some point in this course from Kunu Lama Rinpoche. Kunu Lama Rinpoche was a teacher of the Dalai Lama in regard particularly to Shantideva's text, the Bodhicharyavatara, which we also recite the verses from at the end of these classes. That's an amazing text that you hopefully get an opportunity to study in detail. But Kunu Lama Rinpoche, he was a 20th century Lama who said the following, at least according to somebody's Facebook page. I don't ever know if these quotes are absolute, but I loved it, and so I wrote it down, and Kunu Lama was given credit for it. So Kunu Lama said, "It's this simple. Whoever we encounter did either realize reality or did not." Essentially, we have two categories of beings, right? Either you have the beings who have realized reality, that non-dual understanding we spoke of last week that I touched on earlier. They've realized the wisdom of emptiness, suchness, thusness. We should prostrate at their feet, right? That's what he says. If they did, they stand on their own wisdom and are objects of veneration. Those beings that we might not know if they've actually had that realization, but if that's the case, if it's somebody who has attained that, well, then they're objects of homage, prostrate at their feet. If they did not, though, they are immersed in suffering and are objects of compassion. Thus, nobody is a valid object of anger or derogation, and nobody can ever be abandoned from our hearts. It's a beautiful way to look at it, in my estimation, because you see that everyone we meet is falling into those two categories, right? They've realized reality or they haven't. And the vast majority of beings haven't. They aren't aware of the nature of reality, and therefore they cannot free themselves from this round of existence, cyclic existence that they are caught up in. So it should break our hearts that once more sentient beings suffer needlessly. If they had that wisdom, if they were able to generate that wisdom, they could be free of all of that. But they don't know it. And most beings don't even know that they're in that situation. There's a quote I have in my slides from Noam Chomsky. Why do I have a difficulty saying his last name? And he's talking about public awareness and that, but he's essentially saying people aren't even aware of the fact that they're not aware. That's one of the biggest problems we have. And of course, he's talking about it in a different environment than we are here. In Buddhism, this is the truth, right? Most beings don't even question reality. Most beings don't even go into any sort of pursuit of, hey, is there something more going on here? Or if they do, maybe they find something that they could, kind of hitch themselves to and follow and what have you. But will it lead to liberation? Will it lead to enlightenment? These are the questions. That's why we do these teachings. That's why we investigate these teachings and meditate on these teachings, is so we see the gold in them. We see that they are teachings we can rely upon to attain the result that we seek. But once more, most beings aren't even aware that they aren't aware. They don't have that understanding. Again, I'm not putting anyone down. This is never meant to be in any way. As Kunu Lama Rinpoche says, no beings are the object of derogation. I'm not in any way putting people down. It should break our hearts that beings are in this situation. Because they don't have to be. If they had that wisdom, that knowledge, they would be free from that. So great compassion is really rooted in that idea that we understand that there's a way out and that we want to be in the best position to help beings to find that. That will feed into our bodhicitta then. So great compassion helps in the middle. It's like water on that fruit tree that is growing up, that sapling that eventually will become this amazing fruit tree for perpetuity. In the end, when you become a Buddha, well, you might think, oh, I don't need my great compassion then. I've accomplished the result. But your great compassion is there in a non-conceptual way. It informs all the activities of a Buddha. It's like, as it says here, a state of ripening. When the tree is fully there, well, then it just keeps giving more fruit, right? Year after year after year. Of course, as long as we don't get the late frost, right? Here in New Mexico, we lose a lot of fruit because of the way weather works. But nonetheless, a fruit tree, that is its purpose, is just to continue to give benefit to beings. So as it says there on the right, compassion is important at the end, since just like the state of ripening of a fruit tree that then becomes a source of great enjoyment and resources for others, the culmination of great compassion is found within the final result of Buddhahood. If one lacks compassion at the end, one will not be a source of enjoyment and use by sentient beings as long as psychic existence lasts. But that begs the question, is it possible to lack compassion at the end? I don't think so. It's just putting forward this kind of, I don't know, speculative question. If a Buddha were there in the fully developed mind, having developed the wisdom side of the path, and didn't have the compassion side of the path, didn't have that other wing, could the Buddha do what the Buddha does? Well, no, because that's a key element. It's just pointing out the importance of compassion at the end. But if you've developed compassion fully at the beginning and throughout the path and all the way to the end of the path, well, then it's there in the state of ripening. It's there in Buddhahood. They say that the great love and the great compassion of a Buddha, again, as I mentioned earlier, they're not conceptual. A Buddha doesn't go, oh, there's Gary, and I need to be concerned about Gary's suffering and help Gary on his path. And oh, there's Nancy, and I need to do the same. A Buddha is doing that constantly. You know, when you become a Buddha, one of the analogies that's used in Maitreya's text is this idea of being like the sun. You know, the sun is always shining, right? You know, here in New Mexico, we're blessed with so many days of sunshine, right? We were talking about that earlier, Karen and I about how we enter into that period of the year where a lot of people suffer from some, weather distress because of more cloudier days and what have you. But, even when we have cloudy days, the sun is still there, right? The sun is always shining. It's doing its job of just radiating out warmth and light continually. Well, this is what Buddhas are like. They're just doing their job constantly. Whether sentient beings benefit from that or not depends upon their own individual location, situation, right? It's the same with Buddhas. I mean, the Buddhas are doing this, and we will benefit when we align ourselves most directly with that force through generating great compassion, through practicing the path, through opening ourselves up to the influence of these beings. It's said that Lama Tsongkhapa, who again is the writer of the commentary that we've been looking at on occasion for this text, he had his Buddhas, his gurus, manifesting in the form of a Buddha, in particular the form of Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom. So he kind of was able to purify his own obscurations, to have this pristine, light-bodied being appear before him and teach him. I mean, outrageous stuff. Most of us, go, I haven't had that happen to me yet. Well, because we haven't purified our minds to that degree. We can access these beings and their influence in greater and greater ways the more we develop. But this is what we want to become for others then, is a force that will be there like the sun, continually shining, doing everything from our side to help beings. But once more, we can't enlighten them from our own side. We have to have their receptivity, their movement in this direction. And then we can begin to move them along and increase their capacity. But it all starts once more with great compassion. That's how great compassion manifests in the end, is by becoming a source of whatever beings need to help them on their path. This is what we're aspiring to become when we're practicing this path. I want to go back to the commentary just briefly because there is one passage at least. I did highlight a number of passages, but I don't know that I need to go through all of this. This is the pages like 9 through, 13 or something, maybe not that far, 9 through 11. But there's a little section at the end here. I went down a little too much. Oh, I'm sorry. It's in this section. Okay, forget it. Forget I said that. Erase that. Because, yeah, we're going to talk about this a little bit more when we get into this first type of compassion. So let me just check in and see. I don't want to open up to too many questions or comments, but is there something that people feel that needs any clarification in regard to the things I've touched on already today? We, again, did a brief review of that first verse that had to do with this chain of causes, all rooted in great compassion, and then looking at the importance of compassion at these three times. Anything anyone wanted to share or ask? Online, if you want to go down again to your react button and click on that and raise your hand, we'll know. But if you don't want to be on camera or have your voice recorded, then you can put something in the chat as well. Anyone? No? Everybody's copacetic with what I've talked about. Okay, good. All right. So where does Chandrakirti go from here? So this very first part is a general praise to compassion. Once more, we saw this at the beginning, without differentiating the types of compassion. As we're going to see in the verses we're going into now, which is verse 3 and then the first part of verse 4, now he's going to differentiate it into three types of compassion. Three levels of compassion that are once more back to this idea of why I called this course Uniting Wisdom and Compassion. The last two in particular do involve deeper wisdom teachings of the Buddha. But even this first of the three types is going to entail some understanding of the situation that sentient beings are in that informs our compassion. We already did talk about, of course, that beings are subject to the three levels of dukkha, the three levels of suffering. What we're doing essentially in this verse that I'm going to go to next is that we have an elaboration on that. How can we come to understand that through an analogy? And the analogy that is used is this idea of a bucket in a well. That if you kind of drop a bucket down into a well to get water and so on, there's different factors of this analogy that are similar to the way that sentient beings are in the well of samsara, in the suffering situation of samsara that they are in. So I want to introduce you to these three by using a few slides. Let me actually go forward to, here's where I want to start. Okay, do the slideshow from there. Should be seeing it on the screen. Great. In these two verses, again, verse 3 and then the first part of verse 4, Chandrakirti honors and pays respect to the three types of compassion. The compassion observing sentient beings. We're going to talk about what that means. It's a little more than just sentient beings. It's understanding their situation in terms of the suffering that they have to endure, the dukkha that they are experiencing. 2, the compassion observing phenomena, which is shorthand for understanding the impermanence of phenomena, particularly, again, the causal phenomena that are in our world, that are arising and abiding and disintegrating. All of this is the impermanent nature of things that arise from causes and conditions, and those sentient beings are such phenomena. Number 3, the compassion observing the unapprehendable, which is the fact that you cannot apprehend a sentient being who exists inherently. This is where we understand their emptiness, and we imbue our compassion with that understanding of emptiness. Again, you'll have more on 2 and 3 in next week's class, so hang in there. It might sound a little obscure right now, but we're going to do a short description of each of those in a moment from His Holiness and Venerable Children in their book, In Praise of Great Compassion, which includes, as I've said, a section on these verses that we're covering in this course. All three minds of compassion have both an observed object and a subjective aspect. In other words, they're all looking at something and observing it, and that is how the compassion is being cultivated, but they have a subjective aspect in terms of what that compassion looks like, what it is, the nature of that compassion. So the observed object is the basic object that the mind focuses on, whereas the subjective aspect is the way the mind relates to that object. All three types of compassion observe sentient beings, right? That's the main reason why we are generating compassion. We don't generate compassion towards tables and chairs and, rocks and whatever. Some people believe that those things have some consciousness. In Buddhist terms, they're not identified as sentient beings, but, we have can have respect for all those aspects of our world that are inanimate. But here we're looking at sentient beings. That's our observed aspect. The observed object is sentient beings. And all three have the subjective aspect of wanting to protect them from samsaric dukkha, from suffering, from all the various levels of suffering that they experience. So we are talking again about them being similar in nature. All three of these are a great compassion that is observing sentient beings and wanting to free them from that suffering. But how they are going to think about sentient beings is slightly different from one to the other. First of all, we're going to look at their situation just in terms of what it is that they have to experience and why they're experiencing it. Again, using this rich analogy of the bucket and the well as a way of seeing sentient beings having to endure suffering. Then we're going to take a look at even deeper wisdom teachings that the Buddha gave in the last two types of these three types of compassion, and understand that sentient beings, once more, could be free of all of this if they had deeper understanding, if they had deeper wisdom. So that's again what we'll go into next week. But let's go ahead and look at His Holiness and Venerable Children's brief description of these three. That is, while observing sentient beings who are the observed object, the mind of great compassion has a wholehearted determination to protect them from samsaric suffering. And again, that's a subjective aspect. In particular, the first compassion observes just sentient beings or mere sentient beings who are afflicted by one form of dukkha after another. It does not observe them as qualified by either their impermanence or their emptiness, because those are the way that we qualify them in the next two levels of compassion. We're simply here observing the conventional state that beings are in, that they are suffering, dealing with dukkha, and as I said, we'll have a rich analogy to look at that. In numbers 2 and 3, the last two types of compassion, they focus on sentient beings qualified by specific attributes. Here, the wisdom side of the path that involves the realizations of impermanence, selflessness, and emptiness accompanies the method side of the path, adding depth to our compassion. So this is, again, the whole purpose of this course. I didn't share the objectives of this course at the beginning of today as I did the last two sessions, but remember, one of the main ones is so we can begin to not just understand the importance of compassion, as we did through the initial verses, but also understand how we can imbue our compassion with a deeper understanding of the situation of sentient beings. It's one thing, again, to have a compassion that is, really upset and saddened and depressed and crying all the time about the suffering in our world. But it's another to understand all the factors that have led to that and to want to do everything we can to remove what is blocking us from attaining our potential and being free of suffering, and then help others to do the same. So this wisdom side of the path is obviously an important part of it. And if we can bring those two together, we can make our compassion very powerful, as His Holiness and Venerable Children were saying there. All right, let's move forward with the recitation of the verse that we are going to look at, verse 1. Let me pull it up a little bit on the screen. I'm sorry, verse 3 here, the first verse that we're looking at in regard to the first type of compassion. Homage to that compassion for migrators who are powerless, like a bucket traveling in a well, through initially adhering to a self, an I, and then generating attachment for things. This is mine. Now, what's being spoken about in those last two lines is what we call kind of the root of samsara, the root of cyclic existence. It's often referred to in technical terms as the view of the transitory collection. What does that mean? There's a little bit in, oops, I didn't mean to click off of that. There's a little bit in our commentary on that. Let's use the commentary for a moment so we can get Lama Tsongkhapa's words introduced in here. So in that yellow section that's underneath the verse, Tsongkhapa starts off by talking about this view of the transitory collection that's in the last two lines. This view of the transitory collection as a real I generates the view of that collection as real mine. Therefore, these sentient beings initially, prior to the view of the transitory adhering to real mine, adhere to an I as a truth. The view of the transitory apprehending a real I thinks that the self, which does not inherently exist, does so. Subsequently, the view of the transitory apprehending real mine generates attachment for the truth of the mine, thinking this is mine with respect to phenomena other than the I, such as forms and eyes and so on, all the various phenomena that we kind of hold to and hold dear and hold to as being ours. So what is being talked about here? This is a specific form of ignorance. It's in the traditional teachings, it's detailed as one of the 5 afflicted views. But the view of the transitory collection, essentially what it's doing is there's a sense of an I that each of us has in regard to our collection of body and mind, right? You each have your own body and mind, and you think of that as I. That's the transitory collection that is in this phrase, view of the transitory collection. But when you don't recognize that this is simply a label, a designation that we're giving to this, we're just simply thinking of this as I, then we think that there is a real I there. We think there's a real I together with all of this stuff. This is what the Buddha says is the most fundamental ignorance that is driving the show. It's the root of samsara. We cling to that sense of a real I. And I use this term real because Rinpoche uses it, Lama Tsongkhapa uses it. But don't think when I say there is no real I that it means there's nothing at all. There's no real I in the way that we think there is. There is an I, but the I exists in a very, very subtle way. How? As a mere imputation, a mere designation to this collection of stuff. But we don't realize that. Most beings don't even question it again. They don't even know what they don't know. Instead, they think there's a real me here, and everything is driven by this real me and its needs. And on the basis of that, we get entangled with things that we see of as mine. So this mine isn't referring to the phenomena themselves, the computers that we own or the phones or the houses or the whatever that we kind of think of in that light. It's the possessor, the person who is now the possessor. We initially think there's a real person here, and then because we're in this world of all this delightful, wonderful stuff, we think, that's mine. We have a possessor mentality that is craving and clinging to all of these things. This is how we get in trouble. This is how our attachment arises, that thinks all those phenomena that give us pleasure, we need to hold on to them, keep them in our lives, and then that way we will continue to have the happiness that we seek, not realizing that it doesn't lead to real happiness at all. And we also, of course, get bent out of shape when things come in and interfere with that process, separate us from what is pleasant, or cause us to experience what is unpleasant. And then we have to experience that stuff, and we have a strong aversion to that. We might have minds of anger or even hatred towards factors that cause us to have those painful experiences. It's all revolving around this strong sense of an I. The view of the transitory collection begins with the view of an I that is, we believe is here, that we are going to have all our decisions rotating around that point of view. And then it becomes a possessor. It thinks of things as mine. It is wanting to relate to the world around us from that perspective. And it's all, as Venerable Rabino would say, a big fat lie. It's a big fat lie. We are believing in something that has no veracity. It does not exist. And that's why, once more, sentient beings, ourselves included, are suffering because of this big fat lie. It'd be one thing if it was just, okay, it's a big fat lie, joke's on me. But it's causing you to suffer unbelievably since beginningless time. So we have to take this seriously. This is a pretty major factor, and this is why the wisdom side of it is so important for ourselves, of course, to develop to the degree that we can benefit others, but of course to understand that all beings can have that wisdom imparted to them eventually. It takes a lot of time and causes and conditions to come together, but if we are dedicated to doing that, then we can help them on that path. So as we're going to see when we look at this analogy of the bucket and the well, that what's kind of driving the whole show is this ignorance, this misunderstanding. And we focus a lot on this in Buddhism. The teachings on emptiness are important to think that, to get to the place where we realize, first intellectually, conceptually, and eventually in a much deeper way, a non-conceptual way, that this self doesn't exist. This I doesn't exist. But we, moreover, lay that same sense of things having an independent or intrinsic existence on everything around us. We think that there are real flowers here. We've encountered flowers so many times. The first time you encountered one, you don't even remember, right? Somebody showed you something like this, and you might have been very young, and you go, oh, what is this? And your parents said, oh, this is a flower. Or whoever it was that was coaching you and labeling things, designating things. Lama Zopa says that the first step is that we have a basis that appears before us, and we give it that label. And if we stop there, we'd be fine. The problem is that due to us having had ignorance since beginningless time, we have this imprint in our minds that causes the flower to now seem to exist from its own side. The label of flower, the concept of something that has petals and stamens and all the other parts of it that arises from a stem that is due to planting a seed and all this, everything that informs what a flower is, it seems to have its own flowerness out here on this object. And it doesn't exist that way at all. We can, undermine that misconception. But the very second step is that it appears back to be real from its own side. It appears to have its own reality. The third step, Lama Zopa says, is that we then agree to that. We assent to that. We believe in it 100%. And once more, most beings don't even question it. I mean, you have to kind of be introduced to these teachings to begin to question, well, how do flowers exist? How do computers exist? How do I exist? And if we begin to go to that investigation, we see that that third step is the big fat lie. We are telling ourselves repeatedly that things exist from their own side. The flower exists from its own side. I exist from my own side. I exist in this concrete, real way. And once more, if it was just a casual mistake that we were making, it'd be fine. This is the most crucial mistake that we are making in our lives since beginningless time, because we continue to perpetuate that lie, believe in that lie. All the teachings the Buddha gave, are to help us to undermine that ignorance. And of course, to become capable of helping others to do the same. So again, compassion and wisdom are these two factors. If we understand what's going on the wisdom side of it, that due to this ignorance, beings are continuing to suffer. And if they were only free of that, could stop believing in this real I and this real mind and stop getting involved in the world in these, dangerous ways that are causing them and others suffering, then they would be fine. Everything would be great. They would achieve the peace that they actually deserve. That is actually part of our birthright. We all have Buddha nature. We all have the potential to develop our minds to that degree. So if we develop our wisdom together with the compassion that wants to benefit beings, then we can help them to be free of that. So this first part, this very first verse, is already delineating the fundamental problem, the situation that sentient beings are in. It all boils down to the fact that they're under the control of this ignorance, this view of the transitory collection. As I said, it's kind of a subset of the overall ignorance because, as I was pointing out just a short while ago, we also think flowers exist from their own side, and we think computers exist from their own side. This is a mistake we're making with regard to everything. And we start, though, with the person, with the I, because this is where everything's rotating around. This is the center of our universe, right? Is the sense of self from which we behave, from which we act, we say things and do things on the basis of trying to protect this false sense of a self, this person. So the view of the transitory collection is an important thing to understand. There's many different names for this. Sometimes it's called the perishing aggregates, the view of the perishing aggregates. There's, again, the whole point of it is that we are looking in an unhealthy way at this collection of stuff that we think of as I and thinking there's a real I here. And that real I is a possessor of phenomena and what have you. So I think we're clear on that one. Let's go forward with this wonderful analogy of this bucket and the well. Never sure where to start. Let me start with Tsongkhapa's commentary, and we'll see how that goes. And I might go to my chart as well, the handout that I put together for this. So Chandrakirti's homage to compassion observing sentient beings is homage to compassion for migrators, wandering powerlessly like a bucket traveling in a well. Again, we saw that in the verse. And migrators is another term for sentient beings, migrating from life to life. We're not talking just about like butterflies and birds, that migrate. We're talking about, we are migrating from life to life. So the question is raised here in Tsongkhapa's commentary, in what way are migrators similar to a bucket in a well? Now the answer is sentient beings are the bearers of similarity, and a bucket in a well is the object of similarity, both having 6 features such as being tied. This is the first one we're going to look at, that they are kind of tied by a rope. So we're taking here a bucket and a well, and we're comparing sentient beings to this bucket and a well. All right, so that's the point of similarity that we're looking at. And there are 6 similarities to what a bucket is going through as it goes up and down in a well versus what sentient beings are going through as they travel throughout samsara, throughout their countless lifetimes in cyclic existence. The first feature, as it says there, I don't know if this highlighting makes it easier or harder to read on the screen. Sorry if I'm making it more difficult for you. The first feature is that these worldly beings are bound very tightly by the rope of contaminated actions and afflictions. In Chandrakirti's commentary, the word these should be applied to the other 5 features also. So again, these worldly beings have the similarities that we're going to look at in regard to all 6 of these. But for the first one, they are tied, again, by the rope of contaminated karma and afflictions. By the way, I do have a little definition of their description of a view of the transitory collection that you can take a look at later. Here's the analogy of the bucket and the well on the screen there, okay? So in the very first one, the rope attached to the bucket, that is the point from the side of the analogy. Now we're going to look at from the side of beings. Beings are bound also by the rope of contaminated actions and afflictions. We touched on this previously. When I talked about that 3rd level of dukkha, I was pointing out the fact that it is referring to the situation beings are in of being under the control of their karma and delusions. They usually just abbreviate it to karma and delusions. By karma, we mean contaminated karma. Well, what is it contaminated by? Ignorance. It's contaminated by this view of the transitory collection. We create karma on the basis of holding to this real I and then involving ourselves in the world in these unhealthy ways. Trying to get what we want through this greedy, desirous mind of attachment and avoid things that get in the way of that through our minds of anger and hatred and all the other delusions, afflictions that derive from those. Essentially, we say there are 3 root poisons. The mind of ignorance, it's at the very beginning of it. And then, of course, the attachment and the anger that arise on the basis of these 2 things happening, getting what we want that we desire and crave, and not getting what we want that we have an aversion towards experiencing. So this process of creating contaminated karma is arising, of course, from the afflictions, the delusions we have in our mind, which the root one is this ignorance, this grasping at an I. We are tied by that. We're like a bucket in the well that is tied to that rope. This is what it means to be a sentient being, to be in samsara, is that you're under the control of your karma and delusions. We don't like to hear that. We like to think, I'm in control, I'm in charge, right? Well, you can get a little more in control by understanding the mechanism, the way in which you are in samsara, because then you can at least have a little more control of your own mind and the afflictions that are arising and so on, and be at least trying to diminish those that are really destructive and try to engage in more constructive karma. That's the beginning of our path, right? Where we start taking notice of how we are, what we think, how we behave in the world. As Venerable Robina says, zip your lip and keep your hands to yourself. That's the starting point of our practice, is just to stop stepping in it with everybody else, right? And then we can do the deeper work. But until you do the deeper work, you're never really free of those factors. You can have a bit more control before that. You can say, okay, I'm going to choose to engage in things that will lead to a little bit better results in samsara. You're still going to be in samsara. Remember when I was talking about that 3rd level of dukkha, that pervasive conditioned suffering, I used Rinpoche's words where he says, you never have a vacation from samsara. That's what that's referring to, is the fact that you never have even 1 second when you are free from that rope. The bucket is never free from the rope. We are never free from our karma and delusions, as long as we're in that process, as long as we're like the bucket in the well. Let's carry on with the other ones as well, that point to more factors that are points of similarity. So let's go back to the commentary. We'll look at what Lama Tsongkhapa says here very briefly in regard to the second similarity. The second is that the process of cyclic existence depends on being impelled by the mind, like the operator of the pulley mechanism. So you have like what's called either like a windlass or a pulley mechanism that is involved in these wells. Actually, I'll put on the screen a little slide that I put together that's got a picture of one or a drawing of one. This is the first of these three types of compassion. So in the lower corner there, you see, again, there's a mechanism, the windlass or pulley mechanism that's at the top there. And then you have the bucket that will go down into the well and, of course, come back up and what have you. But who's the operator of the well? Here we have a person, who is standing there by the well and keeping it, going down to get water and what have you. Not all points of the analogy are perfect, but we still always need an operator, right? The well doesn't operate on its own. Maybe in our day and age, we have mechanized, wells where we don't even have to have an operator there, but there's still something that's behind it, right? Something that is causing it to do it. If it's a computer or a person or what have you. In this analogy, what is causing you to do that is your own mind. Your mind, particularly under the influence of ignorance. So let's take a look at what is in my little chart here as well for this second point of similarity. The operator of the windlass, or again, pulley mechanism, the operator of the process of cyclic existence is an unpeaceful and untamed mind. We have minds that are really out of control. This is why, once more, our practice involves three essential levels that are there for those engaging in the path to individual liberation, as well as for the bodhisattva path. The first thing is we do have to do what I was alluding to earlier. We got to zip our lip and keep our hands to ourselves. Stop engaging in immoral behavior. Immorality, unethical behavior is only going to poison your mind and your karma. It's going to cause you to not have good situations. That's the first of the three trainings we need to engage in. The second one is concentration. That's why we always do a little bit of meditation before we begin a class, right? To try to focus the mind. And in your own practice, hopefully you're engaging in some form of stabilizing meditation, focusing on the breath or some single-pointed meditation on an object. That is an important part of our path as well. That begins to tame our minds. That begins to give us a little more control over our minds. And then the third one is wisdom. We need to introduce the wisdom, conventionally understanding all these teachings, what the Buddha said about why we're in samsara, what the causes of it are, and so on. And then we have to introduce the wisdom that is gets at the root, that actually is the antidote. Those are the three levels of our path, whether we're talking again about liberation or enlightenment. All three are important. So we need to go through a process of pacification, of taming, of getting greater control over our minds. If we do that, then of course we won't have the operator of the whole mechanism. We won't be engaged in a process that is going to lead us into more dukkha. It's essentially what when we're looking at each of these in this points of analogy, we can see that they're a way in to understand the errors that sentient beings have that need to be rectified, need to be corrected. So you have to have that kind of, whoops, didn't mean to go there, peaceful, tamed mind, because otherwise you're going to continue to have the operator of the whole process. You're going to continue to be in the well of existence. The third similarity is that these sentient beings ceaselessly wander in the great well of cyclic existence, from the peak of cyclic existence down to the most torturous hell. These are the range of different existences that the Buddha set out. Now, I know we don't have great conviction in all these various levels of existence that the Buddha taught because we don't experience them directly. The ones that we do experience are human beings and animals, right? We're human beings, kind of derived from animals in terms of evolution. But then there are beings who are animals who we see in our world. And again, this is not the scope of all animals. They say that there are animals in some of the other realms, but we can see with our own eyes those two types of beings, right? Beings that are in the animal kingdom and beings that are human. The Buddha said there are a number of beings who are in a higher state of existence than us, and there are a number who are lower than us, who are experiencing more suffering than we do generally. These realms of existence are taught very extensively in the Buddha's teachings. I don't want to go through them, in great detail, but on your chart, you'll see this little kind of examination of the realm of cyclic existence. What's called the peak of cyclic existence, this is the most subtle state that you can attain within samsara. And of course, you're never really free from samsara. You're still in the well. You're still in the state of being conditioned. But it's an unbelievably blissful and peaceful state because you're even born without a body, a gross physical body. This is what are called the formless realms. There are 4 of those. The next ones, the 4 form realms, are also much more blissful and peaceful states, but you do have a body in those. You don't have all the senses that we have in this existence. But again, that's another state of existence that is perhaps a bit more desirable, but once more, still within the well. Then we have the other upper rebirths in the desire realm, the God realms, the anti-God or demigod realms, human realms. Of course, that's where we are. You can put a little arrow there. You are here. These are the realms that are within what we call the desire realm. So you still have a lot of their embodied beings that are dealing with an environment that is desirous, that is having various things that we want to enjoy or that we are thwarted from enjoying. And then we get down into the lower rebirths, once more the animal realms that we can see with our own eyes and the suffering that goes on there. The hungry ghost realms, these spirit-like beings who experience unbelievable hunger and thirst and so on. And then the hell realms. And as was said in that verse, or in that commentary by Lama Tsongkhapa, there's one of the very worst state of suffering in the hell realms is called Avici. It's the most torturous hell, the unrelenting torment hell, where you never get a moment's respite from suffering at that level. That's in the hell realms. And in the hell realms aren't identical to the way we talk about hell in the Christian traditions or anything. They are places where you go to experience that, and then your karma is exhausted and you go to another existence. But there are cold hells, hot hells, kind of these various hells that you have to go through after having experienced some of those to get your way out of hell. There's really pretty depressing teachings that you can look at in regard to these states of suffering. Now, whether we believe in them or not, we know that just looking at this human life, that things are pretty unsatisfactory. But the Buddha's saying, even if you end up in any of these other existences that are on the screen before you, you're still in the well. You're still the bucket in the well, folks. You have not been made yourself free from samsara. That is what is going on by being being conditioned by karma and delusions to be in samsara. So point 3 there up above, the well itself, sentient beings reside in the well of cyclic existence, from the brightness at the top, the peak of cyclic existence, where again, you don't have any gross suffering at all, because you're not even embodied. You're this mind that is in this state of kind of unbelievable, just blah well-being. I mean, it doesn't have any great quality to it. It's just a state where you're free of a lot of the other grosser stuff, but it's not permanent. And then from there, that peak of cyclic existence, down to the deep dark of the bottom of the well, the most torturous hell. So this is the state that sentient beings are in. They never know a moment of being free from it. The bucket never kind of comes out of the well and is free from the well again until you remove the causes, until you're able to be free of that yourself. Let's go on to what Tsongkhapa says about the 4th feature. The 4th feature is that these sentient beings naturally and effortlessly go downward to bad migrations and must be drawn with great exertion upward to happy migrations. If you've ever worked with a bucket in a well, I'm not sure I really have. I didn't grow up on a farm or anything where there was a well, but you can imagine just from what it looks like that it takes great effort, right, to bring the bucket from the bottom of the well up to the top, particularly if it's filled with water, which is what it's generally used for, right? To retrieve water from the bottom of the well and bring it up. But to go down to the bottom, you just put it in, right? And it just, there goes the rope and it goes all the way down. This is unfortunately the tendency that sentient beings have, is that they naturally descend to the bad migrations. Well, why? Because they are under the control of these factors to experience more of the afflictions that cause them to create the contaminated karma that cause them to take rebirth in those unfortunate states. There's a verse at the beginning of Master Shantideva's text where he says, the coming of a Buddha and the virtue that is created is like a flash of lightning in the dark. And we have this flash of lightning and it's gone. The forces that cause beings to move in a more virtuous direction, which are due to the influence of enlightened beings, beings who are more, kind of progressing on the path more than us, beings who can instill in us a desire to engage in virtue. That's pretty weak. Whereas the strength of our delusions is unbelievable. Beings are naturally drawn into behavior that will cause them to descend to these lower existences. In the traditional teachings, one of the courses that we did in the master's program when I studied there in Italy is the Abhidharma Kosha. It's a kind of phenomenology. It's really quite a difficult course to take because it's encyclopedic. But there's teachings in there that explain how the preponderance of beings are in those three lower realms. Most beings are in the hell realm right now. Then a lesser number, but still greater than anywhere else, are in the hungry ghost realm. Lesser number, but greater than anywhere else, are the animals. So those are like where the bulk of beings are right now. And that's where we've been countless, countless times. And we like to think, oh, I'm a human, I'm doing great, but this human existence, as we know, is going to come to an end. The first level of our path, again, is to make sure we can have a good rebirth so we can continue our spiritual progress. But most beings are caught in kind of being in the lower realms and not really having too easy a way to get out. They say, of course, once you're born in these lower realms, you don't create a whole lot of virtue in those lower realms because most of what you're doing is being driven by your delusions. In the hell realm, you're driven frequently by your anger because everything around you is causing you suffering. In the hungry ghost realm, you're driven by your greed, your desire, because you're constantly wanting something to satisfy your hunger and thirst. In the animal realm, you're under the control of ignorance. I mean, look at the animals, even our pets that we have, sitting comfy in our homes and what have you. They're not real smart beings, as I mentioned a couple of classes ago, right? Might think it's an idyllic life to just lay in front of the fire in the winter and be out and playing in the sun in the summer or whatever. It's not. Rinpoche said once that if you had the mind of an animal for 5 seconds, you would never want to be reborn as an animal because it's such a dull and ignorant mind that is just tortured by that. Can't really. I pointed out previously, yeah, I mean, dogs that somebody will bring in their dog to the Gompa here can sit here and listen to the teachings, and usually it's asleep. Dogs don't really stay awake for teachings, but can they do anything with those teachings? Might give a little imprint or something in their mind, but they can't meditate. They can't engage in good behavior. They can't say, oh, I'm going to stop chasing mice because, it's not good karma to do that. Right? Dogs don't make those decisions. Dogs don't have those kinds of minds. So once more, we're not being speciesist or, in any way trying to say, humans are ideal and better and everyone else is, miserable. We also deal with our suffering, obviously, right? But we don't want to end up in a state where we are in having to experience even greater suffering than what we currently have. So again, this is the nature for us that we tend to descend more naturally to these lower states. This is why when we get this human break, when we're finally in a human state, we should do everything we can to practice the first level of the Buddhist teachings, the morality, that's going to assure that we have a good rebirth at the end of this life. Okay, so let me keep moving or I'm going to run out of time here today. And there won't be time for questions. All right, the fifth similarity is that they have the three sets of thorough afflictions, the order of which cannot be determined one-pointedly. The three sets are the afflictions of ignorance, attachment, and grasping. These are in what are called the 12 links of dependent arising that I introduced you to very briefly, and I'm not going to have time to go into in great detail. The actions of compositional action and existence, and the productions of consciousness, name and form, six sources, contact, feeling, birth, and aging and death. Okay, what is this all talking about? As I said, these are the 12 links of dependent arising. They're on your handout there at the bottom of that page. These are how the Buddha set out the process by which we go from life to life. The very first of these causes is ignorance, and that ignorance acts as a source for us to engage in an action, a karmic formation that then gets implanted on our consciousness and eventually gives rise to its result, which would be a mind and body, name and form, six sense spheres, the way we come into contact with the world around us, that contact that actually occurs, the feelings that we have in being in contact with various things, the craving and grasping, these heightened minds of attachment that arise, particularly at the end of a life, that ripen a karmic seed that propels us into our next existence. And then we are born and we age and we eventually die. And we have the whole process going through again and again. I don't have time to go into the extensive teachings on this, but this is one way that the Buddha talked about how in that set of 12 are three factors: the afflictions, ignorance, craving, grasping, and so on, all the things that are there guiding the whole show, the deluded states of mind, the actions, the karma we engage in, And then, of course, the resultant sufferings that we experience on the basis of those. So these three factors are the same things that we talk about in the first two noble truths, right? The truth of dukkha, the experiences that we have to go through on the basis of our karma and delusions, the causes of that. So again, not getting any brand new teachings, but unfortunately, like I said, I don't have time to explain the whole 12 links of dependent arising. I think we went into an entire teaching on that in the master's program when we got to that point. But this is the mechanism by which all beings are suffering. They're under the control of these factors. So again, going back to the analogy, if we get to that point up at the top here, the fifth, this has to do with the fifth one there, the quick rotation of the windlass. The rotation within psychic existence is circular, making it difficult to tell where each of the three afflictions, actions, and rebirth begin and end. We're caught up in this process. It's continually like layering on top of itself and repeating, because every time we have a moment of ignorance that causes an action to be engaged in, we plant a new seed for another existence. And then that eventually ripens into its own existence. And in the meantime, we're creating the causes for more existences, and we're also experiencing the results of prior existences. It's all one big mess. We are caught up in something that we can't even pick it apart. We can understand these three factors, but within it, it's just this mess of propelling us forward, rotating the windlass so we go from life to life. The final one, number 6, the battering of the bucket against the sides of the well. This refers to the fact that within psychic existence, there's a continual battering of sentient beings by the three types of dukkha, or suffering, that we talked about. Lama Tsongkhapa says, the sixth feature is that every day these sentient beings are battered by the sufferings of pain, the suffering of change, and of course the third, the most pervasive, the pervasive suffering of being so conditioned as to be always ready to undergo pain. Therefore, these sentient beings do not pass beyond the state of a bucket in a well. That's all I have time for today. I want to introduce you to the meditation that I'm going to encourage you to work with. This again is out on the materials page. So if you go once more to the website, to this class in particular, and click on it, then there'll be a materials link, course materials link, that will get you to the folder where these are located. This will be under the meditation tab. There's a little introduction to this about how to work with this. Once more, it is good to start with thinking about how this is your situation. Don't think that this is, oh, everyone else is going through this, but I'm exempt. Somehow it doesn't apply to me. Then begin to work with people who you're quite close to, and then begin to move towards others that you're not as close to, and eventually the difficult people, what we might call our enemies, or those that really challenge us in this world. Again, that's over much time. Over the next week, you may only have time to work with yourself and maybe someone who's close to you. That's fine. There's a little preparation, generating a good motivation. And then the body of the meditation, where you review this verse that we just went through, and how, again, this is what is our situation, and then we can meditate on how that's the situation of others. So again, in meditation, imagine a bucket traveling in a well, da 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 da, and then you look at the 6 points of analogy, and then you generate these compassionate thoughts. I'm mentioning these 3 levels of compassion. You start out there with that paragraph that's at the top where it says how nice it would be if this person, if myself or others, were free from suffering and the causes of suffering. You elevate it by thinking, may that happen. May I be free. May others be free from suffering and the causes. And then finally at the bottom there, the great compassion that thinks, I will do that. I will free them from suffering and the causes of suffering. Brief introduction to the meditation. Have fun with it. Don't go on to number 2 yet, or 3 yet, if you are wanting to. We'll go through those teachings next Sunday and give you some guidance on using them in a meditation, the remaining teachings that we have. So, questions? Online? Any questions or comments? So hopefully what I've shared with you, and what of course Lama Tsongkhapa and Chandrakirti through this amazing analogy, has given you a bit deeper understanding. Again, I didn't have time to go into the real depths of some of those teachings, like the 12 links. Remember, in our Lam Rim, the stages of the path, that's our sort of our Bible in this tradition. Do we have somebody coming in? Yes. Oh, Maka. Hold on just one second. Let me finish my thought and then I'll come to you. So when the three levels of the stages of the path, the middle level, the main two teachings are the Four Noble Truths and the 12 links of dependent arising. Those are tools to help us to understand this bucket in a well analogy in a greater depth, to really see again that this is happening to us. That's where it starts. And then we can overlay that in our understanding of others. All right. Sorry. Please unmute Maka and you can share your comment or question. Yes.
Um, I'm pretty impressed by your organization. and
well, I'm following in the footsteps of others who organized it. But.
And your skills of, creating structure and whatever. And just the knowledge you can kind of refer back to these different quotes and teachings and whatever. So that's why I come to the class, just to watch you perform and soak in some sort of wisdom.
You're too
Thank
kind.
you.
All right. Thanks, Mika. Again, I have to always say whenever anybody gives me any accolades or something, I pass them on to my teachers. I wouldn't have a thing to say if it wasn't for my teachers, especially Geshe Jampa Gyatso, who taught me all of this in the master's program for 7 years. So, indebted to them. Anyway. Yes, Teresa.
Hello from my sickbed. Thank
Hello.
you so much.
Oh,
Another beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Let's see if I can formulate this question. I'm reading Loving Kindness by Sharon Salzberg in my book group, and that's been really great for me. And something that she says is that no matter what you do, you'll never stop the suffering in the world, no matter what you do. Yeah, so I don't know. I guess, what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, they even entertain this question in one of the texts in the master's program about, is it possible for there to be an end to samsara? Is it possible to get every being out of samsara into the enlightened state? And, when the Buddha was asked these sorts of questions, he never really said, oh, that's a good question to examine. He just said, what's more important is for us to focus on what we have in front of us right now, which is, if this is the reality, everything I went through today, if what the Buddha explained is the reality that beings are experiencing, and there's a way out, and we can help them to do that, well, let's sign up. Let's put our money there and let's just do that, whether or not it causes suffering to be annihilated once and for all completely in every realm of existence. We can hold that view, and of course we do have to hold that view to some degree, because our bodhicitta won't be complete unless we really hold to this thought that I will help every sentient being to become enlightened. Will you actually do that? Well, no, there's already many other Buddhas out there that are helping sentient beings, and due to their karmic connection to them, you will not, in the end, have to take responsibility for every single sentient being getting out of samsara. But you need a mind that wants to do that, and you need a mind committed to that, because that's the promise of the Buddha's teachings, is that we all can be free from samsara. I think in the debate, there's one point where somebody puts forward the opinion, well, it's possible when we talk about an individual sentient being, yes, they can be free of samsara and attain that enlightened state. But when we talk about all beings, well, then it becomes much more complicated, right? And there may be beings who have a lot of thick obscurations. And some of us might have beings that come to mind in our world right now who we might think fit in that category. But, a lot of beings have thick obscurations. It's going to take them a lot longer. They may require eons and eons to get there. They have the potential to achieve that, but it may be some time before they actually can. And maybe it's possible that they won't. But again, that shouldn't in any way inhibit our desire to do that. We want to be committed to doing that because we have some conviction ourselves that this is the way out. And moreover, we think that other beings can be aided by our understanding and knowledge together again with our compassion that wants to benefit them. So that's the way I see it. When Sharon Salzberg makes these sorts of statements, I'm sure she's saying them in the context in that book in particular. It's about the four immeasurables. And when we are holding these sorts of thoughts first we start with ourselves, and then we work with our friends, and then we work with strangers and so on. We get to that place where we go, how wonderful it would be if all beings were free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they be free from those. That type of thoughts. These are powerful thoughts. And you do have to get to that level where you want every being, with no exceptions, to attain that state. But is it possible? Again, each of us individually, absolutely, we're not going to have to take responsibility for every being becoming enlightened, because that's just not something within our ability. But we need to have a mind that wishes to do that. And when you become a Buddha, you just become a part of that force in the world, that force that helps beings to find this path and this way out, to get the exit sign. Oh, there's the exit sign. I know where to go now. So thanks for that question. And
Thank you. That was a fabulous answer. Of course it was. Thank you so much.
You're too kind. Yeah, I'd have to look at her book to know more specifically where she makes that comment as well. But that's probably hitting the nail on the head in terms of what she's referring to. But I don't know for sure. Let's go ahead and conclude today then, unless there's one last. We didn't get any comments or questions from the Gompa here. Everyone's, again, you're all perfectly realized. I always joke about that maybe everyone else is enlightened and I'm the last one to get, I'm not trying to make myself seem bigger by that, but maybe trying to say, make myself seem smaller. You all are doing your best to help me get enlightened by pretending to be students of mine and everything. Kind of playing that role. This is what Buddhists do, actually. I mean, Buddhists help beings in a variety of ways, right? They can manifest as students for those who need to mature their mind into becoming better teachers. So thank you all. I'm sorry it's taking me so long, but I'll get there eventually. So let's go ahead and do our prayers. And again, if you can work with that meditation, that first point on this first type of compassion, we're observing sentient beings qualified in these ways, understanding their situation, that would be great. And then next week we'll finish off. Was there a question in the comments? I didn't notice that there's a chat. Oh, just a comment. All right. So once more, I mentioned this text by Shantideva. These are the verses from the 10th chapter of Master Shantideva's text that are said to be His Holiness's favorite verses of dedication. So as we recite these, we can bring to mind, very specific situations that are going on in our lives or in the world. And maybe some of us, we want to dedicate for ourselves. We might be dealing with very serious obstacles or illness, various things that are happening in our own lives. But in the spirit of compassion, extend that out. Think about other beings that you're aware of, that you know individually, but also parts of the world where there's great suffering, great strife, due to human harm, due to harm from the elements, and even extend it if you can beyond that. But think that we are making this extreme altruistic wish that all beings benefit from these teachings, from what we have done, kind of giving it away for their welfare, so that they can all be free from suffering and attain the happiness that they seek. So let's recite these verses with those thoughts in mind. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Then we'll do the prayer for His Holiness's good health and long life, all of his wishes to be fulfilled. But as we recite this, think that we're also creating the causes for all those that are manifesting as gurus in our lives, teachers, to have good health, to be able to live a long life to benefit others, and to have all of their wishes and prayers completely fulfilled immediately. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chandrakirti Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. Thank you, Shayla, for sharing those prayers. Let's also just take a moment to dedicate for everything to be auspicious for finding Lama Zopa Rinpoche's reincarnation. Lama Zopa's on my left here, underneath Lama Yeshe. His reincarnation apparently has taken place, but we have not yet located the young child who will take the reins, hopefully, of our organization and lead us. So we can make strong prayers that everything be auspicious for that process, so that being can be of incredible benefit to all beings in this world and beyond. Thank you all. We do have the potluck lunch today. Hopefully you can stay for that. Even if you didn't bring something, please stay if you'd like to. There's always plenty of food in my experience. So I'll see you all in there. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone online. Thanks, Shayla. Okay. All right. Be well, everyone.